Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Noma Cork by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Noma Cork Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
Wojciech Bońkowski is Poland's first master of wine, something of a polymath. He speaks 5 languages and has a PhD in musicology. I caught up with him to chat about his country's dynamic wine industry, his weakness for strange and unknown regions, his predilection for white wines over reds, why smart practice is the way to improve as a taster, and the similarities between tea and wine. Hello, Wojciech, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Wonderful to see you and to hear you. And are you in Poland?
I'm in Tokaj, in Hungary, actually, of course.
Why, of course?
Well, it's my favorite region, or one of my favorite regions, and of course the one that I wrote my MW research paper on. So I'm here to research a big report now on the wines and meet friends, and it's great. Yeah.
I mean, we'll talk about your MW dissertation later because it's really interesting. And I did my MW dissertation on Tokaj as well, so we can chat a bit more about that. I want to start with just talking a bit about your upbringing because you speak all these languages and you're a kind of citizen of the world or citizen of nowhere, as somebody once said. Just tell us where you were brought up because there was a French bit in there somewhere, wasn't there?
Yeah, I grew up in France 6 years. My father worked in exports. Back in those days, in the late 70s, we had this in communist Poland, or what we called, it was socialist Poland. We had a central economy, so there were central state-owned export bureaus for the various industries, and so he worked in one of those, metal product and machinery. So he worked in Nigeria, in Egypt, and then he was sent to France. So I was 2, and my sister was just born, 6 months old, and with my mum we all moved to Lyon. So we stayed there for 6 years, and it definitely got my French language to a very good level.
So you grew up speaking French as well as Polish, but you also speak perfect English. We'll find out why. And you speak amazing Italian and a bit of Spanish as well. So I mean, you're sort of 5 languages, right?
Yeah. I think I think probably the bilingual upbringing contributed to that sort of language, easiness to learn and follow different languages for sure. And
was wine? Were you aware of wine? I mean, you were only up to the ages of 8, so I hope you weren't drinking too much wine in Lyon or Beaujolais.
I actually drank my first wine at the age of 18. I was quite a careful boy. But yeah, of course, wine was around. I just wrote this column on your website about, some of the stories around wine when I was a kid. And definitely there was wine on the table. And, we had French friends and there was essentially no other drink. But also later when we returned to Poland, I remember, I think we were an atypical family from that point of view because there was never any vodka in the house. And I only saw my dad drink beer in the summer when it was 40 degrees, and we would bike in the countryside to a country shop, and he would down a beer, but otherwise it was always wine. So I was surrounded by wine, and yes, of course, yeah.
And then you studied Italian literature at university in Warsaw. I just wonder why Italian rather than French, because there's this very strong connection between Poland and Italy, isn't it? I don't know whether it's a Catholic thing, is it? I don't know.
No, I don't think it's got anything to do with religion. It actually goes back much longer. From the Middle Ages, there was this very strong Italian influence in Poland and the big exchange. The Polish nobility went to Italian universities as soon as they were founded. We had an Italian queen married to our king. She brought many architects to Poland. So definitely there's this affinity, although, we also have some very strong links to France. But I knew French well, and I had already a certificate in French, but I was desperately in love with Italy and Italian language from an early age. Then I started listening to Italian opera a lot, and this was also a massive kick. So I memorized all the librettos of Verdi and Puccini without understanding a word. but I could literally sing or recite, Rigoletto. So I had this very strong impulse to go and learn Italian first in high school, and then there was definitely something that interested me a lot, and I decided to pursue it further. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's finished with your non-wine studies. We'll come on to wine in a minute. You also got a PhD in musicology, and your dissertation was on Frédéric Chopin, another Pole, and you later wrote a book about his favourite food and wines. What did he like to eat and drink? I mean, he was just a sort of strange chap, wasn't he? I mean, obviously very ill, and died young as well. Of consumption, was it?
Yeah, tuberculosis, although there are now various sort of new medical theories, but that was the accepted truth for many years. Yeah, he was eccentric. He was quite a dandy of his time. At the same time, he was very representative for the social changes of his time, the 1830s and 40s, the bourgeois revolution, the salons, the literary and musical salons of his time. So he definitely socialized on a very high level. He wasn't a foodie, as we would call it today. He wasn't a gourmet, but obviously what he ate and drank reflected, his social status and what was going on at that time. And I managed to find many very interesting references to his wines and food. So in my book, I talk notably about how he orders his secretary to fetch him some Tokaj and send him to Marseille where he was staying with Georges Sand, because he couldn't do without Tokaj. So you see, here's that connection. And some other, interesting stories, like they go with Delacroix to a bar and they drink wine at the bar, talking about, the theory of art. You can read, there's a very interesting passage in the Delacroix journals. Or champagne. So they go to one of the famous restaurants of that time in Paris, Le Rocher de Cancale. And the friends know that Chopin is the best connoisseur of wine, so he gets to read the wine list and order wine from the wine list. So it's very contemporary in a way, and there's no detachment when you read those stories. They seem like it could have happened yesterday to us meeting Chopin in the restaurant, and he gets.
God, would have been amazing, wouldn't it? Imagine if you're sitting there and Frédéric Chopin walks in with Delacroix. I mean, that's not bad. That would be better than bumping into a couple of Hollywood actors. Just tell us how you got first interest in wine, because I think it was a bottle of Bordeaux that got you hooked, wasn't it? Not a bottle of Tokaj. Where did you drink it and with whom?
I had a friend who came to see me on my birthday, 21st birthday, and she brought this bottle of Medoc that she had got from her father. She knew nothing about wine. I knew very little about wine, and so she brought this wine to sort of toast me. And so she stayed for an hour, and we had like half the bottle or 2/3 of the bottle. And when she left, I remember going to my dad and saying, have you got a book about wine? Because I'd like to read a bit more. And I think there was something in the taste of that wine which was truly better than the wine that I was normally drinking back then, my student years. But I think it was a very logical evolution also of, all the cultural things that attracted me to France and Italy and the geography and the history and the culture and all that exposure that I had to wine before. So it was the trigger. Yes, it was a bottle of Medoc, which is paradoxical because I'm not terribly fond of Bordeaux today.
Neither am I.
But that's where it started. I think for many people, it starts with a classic, and so it did for me.
Yeah. And you wrote a tasting note on it, didn't you, on the wine?
Yeah, I took a booklet, I took a notebook, and I decided I'm going to be taking notes on all the wines that I taste from now on. And I started with theory. I was always very strong on theory, so I that book that I got from my dad, I wrote down all the French appellations in that notebook in geographical order, starting with Alsace. Clockwise, and then
finishing with Ventoux or something like that. I can't think of anything that begins with a Z. Really.
Loire. No, you finish with Loire, and then I was filling this notebook, appellation by appellation. So, for example, I remember I went to the supermarket with the notebook, and I saw I never tasted a Gaillac, so I bought a Gaillac, and I was tasting that Gaillac, and I was entering that into the notebook. I was very systematic, I think.
So it was the A to Z of wine with Wojciech Bońkowski, right?
Sort of, of course, a bit quite funny, and I never got to taste taste all of them back then, but I had a plan, I think. Yeah.
Have you still got the notebook?
Oh yeah, sure. It's red. Yeah, it's small and red. Not very practical. And
you've got to show it to me next time I see you. I'm dying to see the notebook. And then you went to England, didn't you, to work at Oddbins? Just tell us what took you there, because you've always had this connection with England, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, my grandfather moved to England in the 70s. He was first a correspondent for the Polish press agency. Then he decided to stay. He defected, you could say. He defected to the West. So yes, we had this family connection, and then I had a girlfriend at that time when we graduated from university. She's a cellist, and she got a scholarship to study at Trinity College, to do a postgrad at Trinity. So I decided to go with her. Also because I was just starting my PhD on Chopin's editions, and so it was useful for me to go to the British Library a bit and read. But of course it was wine too, because I was also already writing a wine book at that time. And so the opportunity that London offered to taste wines was, of course, unmatched, still is. Yeah. So I decided to move and to sustain myself. The first day we landed, in London, I had to find a job, and I went to the first wine shop that I saw, which was on Canary Wharf. And they say, yeah, sure. We're very happy to give you 20 hours per week selling wine over the counter. And I think it was a very good experience. I never worked in restaurants or in cafes. I never waited tables, but I worked in retail, and I think it's a very, very useful experience for a wine writer, to be honest.
Why? Because you got to taste so many wines, or you got to meet consumers, people who drink the stuff?
You meet normal people who don't have the romantic notions about wine that you have, or the encyclopedic approach. They're just looking for something nice, but they have criteria, which is also interesting to know what they are. And you got to sell, you've got to be convincing. You've got to, to be a good seller. You need to talk to people, which I've never been very good at. So that was good. It's a good learning curve, getting out of my shell. And, yes. And, you could see what is popular, which definitely is something else that wine critics get excited about. So we had a big shelf at Oddbins in those days of Greek wines, and I think I sold 5 or 6 of them in the year, but plenty of Dom Perignon and plenty of New Sauvignon.
Well, you were in Canary Wharf, right?
Yeah, there was one of the best performing shops in London, and so that was also a good experience, because it was quite high drama, a high drama wine shop, I'd say.
And then you went back to Poland, 2002, and you started The Polish Wine Guy. Was that the book you were already writing? You got involved with the Polish Wine Awards, the Polish Consumer Wine Magazine. I mean, this was quite an ambitious move. You suddenly decided I'm going to be a wine writer after you just worked in Oddbins for a year or so, right? Was there an audience for it in Poland at the time?
There was a burgeoning audience. I was already writing about wine before I moved, by coincidence, by chance. But it was a very virgin market, and so there were lots of opportunities opening, and so lots of doors. And I was just opening the doors and walking through them because I was young and naive and pretentious and very confident. And so I think it followed from there. I wouldn't have achieved all of that, of course, in England, where I was nobody. Even though in retrospect, it would probably have helped my career in wine, maybe to have stayed in London and find a job and maybe move up the ladder in I don't know, in the trades. But Poland, we created from scratch an entire wine culture. Not only me, I had several colleagues. So the book I wrote, the guide I wrote, was co-written with Marek Bieńczyk, who was the first Polish wine critic, and he offered. He said we should write a wine guide like Bétain des Sauves or the Hachette Guide des Vins, and I said, yeah, why not? So we had 15,000 wines in the third edition, and then 33 countries. It was a huge endeavor. I was working full time on this. But this is where I got all my tasting experience and my tasting education. I had to taste everything. I had to go to the Salon des Vins de Loire for 4 days and taste, all the Vouvrays that are produced. And so it was, I think it helped me immensely, that book. And the wine magazine that we started, and it was all very gradual. And the audience was there. I still have readers or clients who come from those days, and are still, faithful followers of what we do today. And so we gradually expanded that and grew the business. And we're still live. So I think there is an audience. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, and Poland makes a bit of wine itself, doesn't it? I mean, are they any good? I just wondered, how old is the history of wine production in Poland?
Yeah. It started with, the regime change and the economic change in 1989, but it really has developed massively over the last decade, I would say, and even the last 4 or 5 years, there's a big new dynamic. So no, we're huge now. We have over 500 wineries and over 1,000 hectares. We don't export. It's a bit like English wine. You have 20 years advantage over us in sort of marketing the wines and then telling the world about them, as well as some very British confidence in their quality. But yeah, Polish wine is going to be the next big thing, because we have enormous potential to grow. So at the moment, I would say there's some very good wines, maybe not world class wines yet, but we've got cool climate, crisp acid profiles, interesting wines.
Which varieties?
80% hybrids, although some of the new PV, like Sauvignon Gris, I think are very interesting grapes with a big potential also for quality. We'll see more of them, and then they'll get more exciting. And then we have Riesling, Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Noir. There's Zweigelt. It's quite an eclectic mix of grapes, much more than in the UK, for example.
Yeah. So the next big thing, you heard it here first, folks. We're going to see. You said once that you were born digital as a wine writer. Just tell us what you mean by that, because you started off writing in a notebook, but you went digital pretty early on, didn't you?
You remember the late 90s, we had no Instagram and no Facebook, and that was even before blogs. I think Jamie Good started blogging in 2001. And he was one of the first bloggers. But before you had those internet forums, there was the Wine Lovers page in the UK. There was another one in the US that I forget the name. And so I started writing on those forums because it was a good entry gate for, informed amateurs. You didn't have to be professional to post there. And you had plenty of peers, and it was all it was a very good environment, very good community, very encouraging. So I started posting, casual wine notes there. And I was very disciplined, so I would write up, all my travels and tastings, and it amounted to quite a bit. And then I also started blogging in 2008. So this was in parallel already with the print activity that we had in Poland, but I definitely started reading and writing about wine on the internet. So in that sense, I think I'm more like the new generation that starts the wine interests online rather than, in print, even though, of course, I was reading books and following printed magazines.
And that's been a huge change, in the last 20 years, hasn't it? I mean, I come from a generation that was still writing everything in newspapers and magazines, and I've shifted with it. Do you think the changes have been positive? I mean, I know you were slightly rude sometimes about influencers and TikTokers and things like that. I mean, even with your digital footprint, as it were, do you see a downside to it sometimes?
Yeah, I don't like nonsense. I like competence. So this is probably the slightly mixed experience of my generation, that everything is very easy now, and everybody's a wine communicator, but not everybody's a quality wine communicator. And I think I really value good writing. And I really value good criticism. I think criticism is very important. It's not only wine journalism and wine stories, but I also like wine reviews. I like people who, taste through a flight of 2021 Bordeaux and just give recommendations to people. I think that's still very relevant. It might be unfashionable to say that because, I don't know, ratings, scores are not very en vogue now, but I think it's still pretty relevant. So I really look for people who have experience, integrity and insights, and that's not always a rule on TikTok, as we all know. But yeah, of course, the democratization is something very positive, because we have emerging voices. We have much more bigger diversity of opinions and voices than we had in the past. It's much less institutionalized, even today to be printed in one of the magazines in the UK. It's very difficult. I can tell you from experience. Yeah. I'm pitching some of the magazines with stories that I think are very relevant, and
they just say no.
I just get no answer at all. So in a way, it's great that people can start on the internet, and even eventually they even start the printed projects. Imagine like Trink. This is a magazine that couldn't have existed 20 years ago, and now it does.
How did you decide which areas to specialise in? I mean, I love a quote of yours. You say that you have a weakness for the strange and the unknown, and that 150 years ago you'd have been an entomologist collecting rare species in Siberia. So where's that taken you? You're in Tokaj right now, but where else are the weird and wonderful places you've been to and you write about?
I've been to many wine regions in Europe, and especially Eastern Europe, of course, which is what was called Eastern Europe in the UK. We call it Central Europe down here. And of course, there are many interesting terroirs and countries, and I think the wine stories of Montenegro or Albania are really waiting to be told. We have a lot of interest in places like Georgia and Armenia. So I think there's an entire area, let's say east of the Rhine, that is really waiting to be discovered and told about. I think I'm collecting great varieties. So I'm definitely chasing, the next Aidani from Greece, or the next Marastina from Croatia. I think Croatia is a very exciting country that is on the up. And definitely, I'm not so interested in going to Burgundy or Bordeaux to meet the same producers all over again. I'd rather go and discover a completely new group of producers in Calabria, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think in many ways it's vital work, because lots of people are going to Bordeaux and Burgundy. I mean, every wine merchant and his or her dog is going to the same chateau in Bordeaux during En Primeur week. But people going to Croatia or Albania, I mean, I've been to Albania, but not to a vineyard in Albania. We should go, actually. It'd be quite good fun.
I'm going next week. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, tell me how you get on. So how do you earn your living now? Because you do lots of different things. You're part of something called the Ferment Media Group, aren't you? How much of what you do is writing? How much is tasting? How much is lecturing? How much is personal appearances? What do you do exactly now?
Yeah, I wear many different hats, definitely. But yes, Ferment in Poland is the media group that we created with my partner, Eva Rybak, back in 2017, and which includes a printed magazine. It includes an online wine magazine, Inicjatywa, which was very popular. We reached at peak 600,000 unique users per year, so that's quite an audience. And we do a wine school, so sometimes I teach twice or thrice per week. Presenting wines from different regions, and then we do events, commissioned events by wine regions or wine countries. But we also do our own formats. So we've got a very popular Warsaw Wine Experience, is the biggest wine salon in Poland, and we also organize this. So we've got like a basket, I would say, ecosystem, I should say today, ecosystem of various services that we offer at Ferment, and this is my main employer, my own company, and then of course I do writing for international publications. I do judging, not a lot, but I like judging, where I judge 50 great Greek wines and decanter. I like these competitions very much. Yeah. And now with the MW, there will be new opportunities probably to consult and work with different regions on their market development.
Let's talk about the MW, which is the Master of Wine, for people who don't know that. And you enrolled, I think I encouraged you to do it in 2016. Yeah. You eventually became Poland's first Master of Wine earlier this year. Well done. Just what made you want to do it? I mean, you were pretty busy already, weren't you? I mean, with all these things you're doing.
I always push myself to do more, sometimes with, horrible results. I'm talking about this morning's jog, for example, here in the swamps of Tokaj. That went very badly, but yeah, I think I felt back in 14, 15, 16. I was getting a bit lazy as a taster. I was taken to all those tastings in Tuscany, Barolo, on a bus with other journalists who always taste the same wines, and I would taste the same wines all over again with pretty much the same approach. I think I needed a kick to slightly refine my tasting, and that was the first impulse. Of course, there was the ambition to get the 2 letters, but that was only part of the story, I think. And I think I wanted to learn also from people in the program, people in the process, and that is the major takeaway that you always have on the MW, especially the first year. You just absorb all of that, and it's an immense contribution to any wine taster or wine professional. So this is how it started. Yeah, I wanted the challenge, and I wanted to grow, and
And what advice would you give to somebody starting out on the program now? I mean, it took you 7 years, the COVID in the middle of it. Yeah. There were frustrations, we could say, along the way. Would it be to be patient?
Yeah, I think you have to be patient and very resilient, because you'll get bashed many times during the program, and I know it's very discouraging mentally for many people. So you have to be mentally strong. I think it's good to ask yourself a few questions before you start. Why am I doing this? Why do I need this for? Can I afford it money-wise, but also can I afford the time that it takes? And can I afford to dedicate, 50% or 100% of my mental energy to that? Mm-hmm. Do I have support? Do I have a family that supports me? What are the possible, problems on the way? Because it is tougher than anybody thinks when they start. So you need to be ready for something that will really change your life, I think.
Yeah, it's like running a marathon, isn't it? You've got to be in shape.
It's like running 30 marathons, I'd say. Yeah.
And your dissertation, like mine, was about Tokai. What did you write about? Because it was quite controversial, wasn't it?
It's called the research paper now, Tim, be careful.
Oh, sorry. It's so long ago since I did it. 2001, remember? It's 22 years ago.
The institutes are very touchy about it. I wrote about the vineyard classification in Tokai. Some of our listeners might know that Tokai was the first region in the world to officially classify its vineyards in the 18th century, in the 1730s, earlier than Port and earlier than Chianti. And this classification is no longer part of wine law, but of course it's part of the wine culture here. The vineyard names, the inherent hierarchy of vineyards, and especially relevant now as many producers focus on dry wines. As we know, single vineyard dry wines are a very topical thing in many regions around the world today. So what I did was to apply the Austrian system as the Lage, which is a very developed system and very structured system, and is now going to be officially part of Austrian wine law probably next year. So it's also a very successful system, and I tried to extrapolate this to Tokai to see what comes out of applying that template, and see what are the other opportunities and maybe also challenges of doing a new vineyard classification in Tokai here.
And have they adapted it or adopted it rather?
There is a big discussion. There is opposition from some of the producers, especially the large houses, the smaller wineries that usually also are more focused on dry wines. They're definitely interested in it. I think the politics of this are going to be very complicated. It's not very clear who should implement it. I don't think it's going to be the official Consejo, the official consortium here.
It really is. Let's face it. I think around the world, I think it should be an association of small producers that will start, bottom up, as we say. But it's under discussion. It's a long way ahead. But also, what I wanted was to initiate the discussion about it and how to do it. And you talked about the dry wines. And what shape is Tokai in right now? I mean, it's probably better known still for its sweet wines, the Azu styles. Where do you think its future lies? Is it with sweet wines, is it with dry wines, or a combination of the two? And do you see dry wines becoming more important?
Yeah, I've had 150 conversations about it in the last week, so I'm very prepared for this. About 20% of the wines today are dry globally in the region. But if you take the premium wines, if you take the good wines, I think it's more like 50%. And it's definitely growing. And the sweet wine market around the world and also in Hungary is stagnant at best. And even though I think we might all agree that Tokai makes some of the best sweet wines in the world, and probably the best sweet wines in the world, in my opinion. Also, the top Azus are wines of total class. But there's only a very limited market for these wines, and also it's not very clear whether global warming is helping to make these wines or not. I think they're going to become rare. It's going to become more difficult in some vintages to make them, and the quantities
because you won't have the humidity you need for botrytis to develop.
Some years are very dry. Some years are very dry. So, of course, dry wine is the way to go, definitely. And the development in the last decade has been huge. So I think today there are some really world-class wines made. I would say the top 50 dry formant or dry wines in Tokai today are on the level of Austrian and German wines, or getting there. So definitely something to watch. But there's a lot of ferment here. I mean, the region is in a horrible economic condition, and there's a lot of nobody comes here. It's at the end of the world. No tourism. There's little infrastructure also. I mean, if you come here, there's not a lot to do. So it's really just about the wine. It's very rural, and Hungary is in dire straits really in terms of its economy and political position. So it's not helping. The war isn't helping at the moment. Some countries are boycotting Hungarian wines because of the stance of the Hungarian government, like Poland or Sweden. So it's a rampant crisis, but at the same time, I think quality is really on the rise.
It's never been better, really.
Yeah. There's a lot of small producers. Every time I come here, there's like 10 or 15 new family wineries. So I think when Tokai re-emerges, it will be taken very seriously as a top wine region.
Just tell us which regions other than Tokai you think are the most underrated in the world and maybe the most overrated. Just quickly, I'm just interested in your opinion. Do you think, you've said Poland has potential, but give us, where do you think are the underrated gems really? If you were giving somebody advice as a wine drinker?
I think Greece has some terrific wines now on the islands and on the mainland, and some are getting discovered like Santorini, but there's much more to Greek wine than just Santorini. I think Croatia is going to be the next Greece. It's got many similarities with Greece, lots of islands, lots of great varieties, Mediterranean whites and reds. And also they've got the continental part, which makes, very nice crisp white wines. So definitely I would be looking at Croatia. I'm looking forward to that trip to Albania because I tasted a few Albanian wines and I think great terroirs and some great DNA material there. So
I hope you'll do a column for me about the Albania trip.
I'll do with pleasure. I think Portugal hasn't really sort of made it yet on the international scene. I think some of the red wines, but also now the white wines are really exciting. They also have volcanic terroirs, the Azores. I think Madeira is going to be making some interesting table wines very soon. And mainland Portugal, I love the Douro whites and reds. I think they're really classy wines. So these are the countries I look for, also for value, if you want to spend your money well. And
overrated? What would you say is overrated?
Well, I think Burgundy is overrated, honestly. I think there's a lot of ordinary wine made in Burgundy. I think, I don't care so much about overrated wine regions. I don't drink much Napa wine, for example. It doesn't really turn me on. I think Jura, there's the bubble of Jura is quite excessive. Some of the prices are really silly. I mean, I like the wines, but I think it's gone a bit too far. But overall, I think there's great wine made everywhere, and even the overrated wine regions are making better wine than they used to. So it's hard to say that someone is like, completely, complete bollocks. Yeah.
I think that's probably true. Listen, tell us about your glass, because I've travelled with your famous tasting glass, the set of them really, because you break them occasionally, don't you? But does your glass have a name? You take your own glass to the cellars, don't you?
I used to. I don't do that anymore. I think the MW healed me from that. I used to think I should have a standard glass just to take one variable out of tasting wines. And it was useful because in many places where you go, there's still horrible glasses, France notably, but also wine fairs. So it was a practical consideration more than a romantic attachment that you attributed to it, Tim.
So it's gone now, is it? The tasting glass is gone.
We're divorced. I got the glass and I use it sometimes, but I think I've relaxed a bit more about it, like many other things. Yeah.
Just tell us, because it's interesting that you said you did the MW partly because you wanted to to improve as a taster. Tell people listening to the podcast how you've become a better taster. How does one become a better taster? Is it just practice?
Yeah, I don't believe in talent in tasting. I think it's practice, but it should be smart practice. I think it's a bit like sports. You can run every day and not improve, but if you've got a plan and you are thinking what you're doing and how can I improve, then I think you will. So tasting for me, I got a bit automatic in my tasting as a journalist because I was tasting a lot of wines and I was happy with how I tasted because we're always happy with ourselves here in the wine business. And I think the MW was a good challenge from that point of view. So my intuition was right because it changed my tasting 180 degrees. I think people focus too much on the aromas and on listing flavors and aromas, making like a catalogue of sort of taste like. I think it's much more important to look at the structure of the wine, and it's much more important to look at how does this wine compare to its peers. Is it better? Is it different? What is really the style within the context? What are the little details that make this wine unique or special? And when you focus on this and not on the mango, and the jasmine, then I think you become much more focused and much more structured. And you also, for example, you taste faster because you don't have to, write all of that encyclopedia of stone fruits. But you can just say, this is crisper than expected in this vintage, but consistent with this producer's approach of making, poised wines. And then I think you're giving the essence of the wine also to your reader when you write the tasting note.
Yeah, and I think that's where experience comes in and knowledge, really, isn't it, about the stuff that you've actually tasted. What do you feel about points? I mean, do you think they're a necessary evil?
Yeah, there's certainly a necessity. If they're evil, I'm not sure. I tend to use scores when I read other people's notes as well, not in isolation. Although when you have, a big comparative tastings, the scores do help you organize, the tasting a little bit. And then in combination with the note, I think that there's nothing really wrong with points. I think we used to be against them. I think we've grown to be used to them and also to make good use of them, both when we score and when we read other people's scores. So I'm not, I'm not political about scores, other than, of course, people who give 98 to every wine. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's a way of calibrating another palate. So you're basically saying, okay, if somebody's given this 97 and something else 92, why? And what is the difference for that person? Then it's a way of, I think, saying, does this person know what they're doing? For me, I mean, there are some people I think of who I don't think know very well what they're doing, without mentioning any names. But just tell us which wines you enjoy drinking at home. I mean, do you dedicate a large bit of your budget of your measly salary as a wine writer to buying top wines? I mean, what do you like to buy?
I get a lot of free wine, so I'm certainly privileged. I mean, I buy wine, but I've loads of wines to drink and taste. I'm pretty eclectic. It will follow the mood of the day. It will follow the bottles that I have, ready for tasting or that I'm curious about. So there's no plan. But yeah, I drink. I would say 85% whites. Probably, the more you taste and the more you work, the more you're tired, and you look for refreshment in wine rather than a heavy experience and a heavy tannic experience. So yeah. I definitely drink a lot of Grüne Veltliner, a lot of Formint, a lot of Riesling, a lot of Greek whites. I like Chardonnay. I really like Chardonnay. I love rosé.
Good to hear.
I drink a lot of rosé. I think rosé is a lovely category, and I enjoy Provence rosé very much. Honestly, when it's well made, for example, and sparkling wines.
Oh, and what about when you're not drinking wine? How do you get away from wine? You're interested in tea, I know, and music. Were you ever a musician or just a musicologist?
No, I never played music, and it was met with astonishment when I enrolled for musicology at the university. I had actually to play a little bit of piano to pass the exam, but otherwise I never played, and I never missed playing. I think it's a very tough occupation, and it's even tougher to make money as a musician than it is as a journalist. So I don't miss that part at all. Yeah, I listen to music all the time. There are some days, I think, when I'm at my desk, I have like 10 hours of playlists running. I exercise, I run quite a bit. Tea is great. I think tea is a great detox. I'm trying to do 2 or 3 wines with 2 or 3 days a week with no wine. And tea's helping, although I've been getting a bit more into coffee recently. And it's interesting how we can, overlap the wine tasting approach to tea and coffee. I think we bring also a very structured approach to tea and coffee. The tea and coffee tastes don't have our vocabulary or our structures at all. So that's interesting also from that point of view.
Interesting. Listen, you're in Tokyo right now. Even though it's a Sunday when we're doing this recording, I know you've got some visits lined up, so I better let you go. You've already done a run this morning. You're full of energy and opinions. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope I'll see you very soon, my friend, either in London, maybe, or in Albania. Who knows?
In Albania. Yes. Thank you so much, Tim. Great talking to you. Cheers.
See ya. What a truly formidable person. I'm so glad we got someone like Wojciech exploring regions that most other wine writers ignore. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is Natalie Christensen from Yealands in New Zealand. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @timatkin and on Instagram @timatkinmw. See you next week.